So great to see you guys after a busy spring batch or P26. Always like to start off the conversation with some observations of what happened during the batch or what stood out. Certainly, this batch seemed to be dominated by discussion of agents. I guess what are the two or three observations that you guys had about this batch, and what stood out?
I talked to some people outside the batch looking in. A lot of them are still saying, "Oh, is it another AI batch?"
Mm.
It's the sort of like maximally zoomed out perspective.
Right,
It's a
right,
lot of
right.
AI companies. You can sort of see that people don't quite know how to process what's happening.
Hmm, hmm.
And you really need to be like in founder mode, understanding, following all the changes in the technology, talking to people, seeing how companies are adopting these things to really understand what's going on. Um, so, we predicted, in 2025, we predicted that in 2026, we'd start seeing agent companies in YC. And we certainly have seen agent companies in YC. So those are companies, startups that are building things that you couldn't build before by using agents, building new, vertical law firms that use agents. We saw that last batch. This batch, one very new thing we're starting to see is startups that are focused on building for agents. And so founders are thinking about what are agents going to want to use? What tools are they going to want to use? It's been a sort of a thesis of ours that this would happen. But it couldn't happen at sort of grand scale until there were actually agents. Exa was one of the earliest on this. But now that there are actually useful agents, startups are finding that they need to build stuff for those agents. And they're looking at what are the bottlenecks that agents run into and what kinds of startups can they build.
Some examples there, we have
Yeah.
agent phone that we did, which just makes it very easy for your agent to get a phone number.
Double click on that. Like, what's the future look like that? Like, agent phone is needed in everywhere. Like, I chat to some people who are trying to wrap their head around it. I'm like, in the future, you're going to have 3 or 4 agents yourself. Your work is going to have multiple agents, and they need these things. So, like, maybe as it relates to agent phone, kind of walk through the future that the founder saw and or is seeing, and that we saw when we talked to them.
Actually, since they just announced this, might be a useful sort of comparison point on this thesis. So Bland from 2023 just announced their Series C round. They're doing extremely well. And so Bland does long phone calls between humans and agents. And so if there's complex things to figure out, Bland is like this enterprise solution for agents to talk to humans. And they said that in 2023, during YC, when they pivoted to Bland, they got rejected by 180 investors. And whereas Pioneer was so excited just seeing the API, and the API was literally, here's a phone number and a goal. And then you could just say, hey, talk to United and confirm my flight. That was the input. And then the Bland would take all that abstraction and go make it happen over the phone. Even at that point in 2023, we had the thesis that voice would be, and AI in general, would be this kind of universal API. Universal API meaning it goes between AI systems and humans, and AI systems and other AI systems, and AI systems and computer systems. So you need some kind of interface to communicate. And so we've made a few investments in that space, but this latest one, Agent Phone, sort of embraces the fact that these agents are going to need to be able to call people. And over time, they'll probably need to be able to call each other or have some kind of communication protocol that if you have both on the same system, you'll be able to have a very efficient protocol for agents to communicate with each other.
Looking back at winter 26 and fall 25 and summer batch, there seems to be this shift, I guess, from like AI co-pilots for people to agents as a customer to now like agents doing entire jobs. Kind of looking back at this spring batch, how did you see that manifest in the batch?
I would say it feels a bit more common and obvious now. It's not obvious, but to see a full AI agent replacing rather than the co-pilot, which was always, if you're thinking ahead, that seems to be where you go to. So there have been a few over the batches, but I think now I'm seeing less. I almost feel like I'm seeing less co-pilots.
Oh, very much so.
There
I
are,
think that's like
yeah, there
I
are
guess sort
some.
of the trend where it's like that, the early days, for lack of a better term, of AI, where, people were thinking this co-pilot
Yeah.
mindset and then like agents. And now it's like, agents as a customer, which I think will continue certainly for quite a while. But now like agents doing entire jobs, like, replacing labor spend with agents.
And the difference there is the business model.
Mm-hmm.
And when there's business model shifts, that's when you see sort of the biggest disruption. So, there was a wave of startups a few years ago, like Harvey, where you provide AI software to law firms, right? And they adopt it and it makes them a little more efficient. But it didn't change the business model of a law firm, right? It's still a law firm. It's still billed per hour, everything. Last batch, we saw the start of full stack AI law firms. So these are startups that are law firms, not startups that are selling software to law firms. And so that is going to be and so you still have a human in the loop at the top. You still have an actual lawyer reviewing things, but how much of the work can the AI do? And then what does that mean for how you charge customers?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of fascinating watching it happen, like just sort of humans getting the psychology and getting more comfortable with agents and AI getting better, business models being adopted and experimented with. And it's sort of like they just continue to trend, to your point, like new pricing paradigms need to open up, how people think about agents, and just like, so much new white space on different business models is opening up.
This is both a business model and what does this new world look like when there's agents? There were a couple startups in this batch that involve essentially agents hiring people.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, speak to this one. Yeah.
There are certain times where agents run into a bottleneck and they don't know what to do, or they can't do something physically.
Right.
And so there's a startup called Rent a Human, batch, literally called Rent a Human, where AI agents can hire people to do some specific task. And there was another one called Humwork, where while you're coding in your code editor, for example, or while this will be true for other types of work too, but while you're using Claude Code, if Claude Code is sort of stuck on some problem, like it's not quite sure which database setup to use or something like that, it can actually request help automatically from a human expert and gets matched with a human expert within like 30 seconds. And the human expert gets paid and unblocks Claude. And so this notion that the AI can go like ask an expert on a particular topic, that is a very strange startup. That hard to wrap one's head around, but we got quite excited about it.
Shifting gears a bit, like it's pretty dense agent software batch, but also there was some heavy physical world things happening: nuclear, drone, space, MRI, robotics. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Like what was exciting? What were some new things that were popping up in the batch that we hadn't seen before?
I think if you look back 10 years ago, a lot of investors sort of shied away from backing hardware startups. It was considered like too expensive to start, too all or nothing, like you'd just be building for years and years and years without any customers. But we're seeing quite a shift in YC over the last, call it 6 years, where A, they're backing a lot of hardware startups. B, there's a bit more of a playbook for how to do them. People are seeing some of the biggest, most important companies in the world are hardware startups. And so, in this batch, we saw quite a few. One of them, Adiolante, is making a new MRI machine.
What was it? Yeah, I've forgotten how quickly they built one. What was the story
they
there?
Built the whole thing in like I think it was 8 weeks.
Yeah, so it was wild.
They scanned their own brain.
Yeah.
A week before demo they scanned their own brain. And this MRI is like a new invention. It's smaller, lighter, cheaper. In fact, it's so small that they can put it on a truck and bring it around to clinics that don't have MRIs.
As a founder, that's the ultimate, like, hey, I trust this machine I made. I used it myself.
Great story there on the watermelon. Obviously, high conviction for a founder to trust the MRI. They built in 8 weeks and shoved their head into it. For us, we had a lot of high conviction calls. A lot of companies we were really excited about this batch. It's hard to pick one or two, but if you had to pick one, just to speak of here, what's a call or a discussion that reflecting upon, you're like, just this founder was amazing. They're solving hard technical problems. They're just building up regulatory moats that were just going to make them unstoppable. Eric, I'll put you on the spot. What's the first one that jumps to mind for you?
There's a company in this batch that is maybe the most AI pilled that I could think of. And that's tough. We talked about Rent a Human and some of the other crazy things going on. But there's a company called Thomas, and Thomas is the name of the founder. Thomas is AI counterpart, and the AI counterpart is the business. The business is set up a reinforcement loop with Thomas that says spend tokens, get the highest return back, and put that into your model and do it again and keep going until you have the entire GDP under control. As a VC, we often think about abstractly, oh, this has network effects, it'll win, this will take over, this is the number one. But this is kind of, I think, extreme for a founder to kind of feel and see that. And that's not exactly true. Like, they will still spend money on Anthropic, or there will be other services happening, but kind of as a mental framework, it kind of shows you how big this could be. And this is something I've been looking for a while.
Fascinating where that can go. Tim, for you for the batch.
There's a startup in the batch called Nine Mothers. And what he's building is a little turret that automatically shoots down drones. This is important on the battlefield, because right now drones are the sort of dominant factor in a battle, and there's no defense for them. There's these very, very large systems, but they're sitting ducks. And so you need something that's small, lightweight, fast, portable, and autonomous.
Shifting gears, like we've chatted about some of the things we've seen in the batch. If we think of some, I guess, potential categories or ideas or a type of founder that we expected but didn't see in the batch, like, a little bit, I guess, maybe future predictions of like what we might see next batch or the batch after that we didn't see this one. Anything that come to mind?
Well, we got a taste of what's coming when Fable 5 launched from Anthropic. I had a few days to play with it before it got taken down.
How are you thinking about that? Hearing how people engage with AI, Fable being our little taste of it, and I think people are already using that, the loop engineering with existing models as well.
It's interesting. I guess my hypothesis has been that probably AGI is a term everyone likes to use, but which is pretty loaded. But if you think of it differently, what's all the work that I do in a day? Probably most of all the work that everybody does could be done by agents it's more of an engineering problem if you break it down into smaller chunks.
The interesting thing is the feeling I had when using Fable 5 was, wow, I want to do way more stuff.
Right. Like in terms of job creation, like often a comment that comes up just with AI is like the concerns on, obviously has been and will be displacement on work. But to your point on like, wow, all the things I can do now. And so, for me as a previous startup founder or working at corporations before, all those ideas were there. Like, gosh, we'd love to do this, but it's kind of like, we're going to have to hire like 10 people.
Yeah.
But now it's like, oh, actually we only have to hire 2 people, and we, throw some AI at it with some agents. And now we can do that thing.
Over time, humans have found new interests and desires. Human wants are kind of unbounded. It's one way I look at it. So exactly what you said. I can do this. Let me do more. And so
we chat about Fable models are moving quickly. Conversation we often have with some of the companies is like, what's a actual company versus a feature? Certainly the risk of the black hole framework.
We think about all the companies in this lens. The black hole mental model is the black hole are the foundation labs. And if you are building right at the edge of the black hole, maybe trying to augment something that the models can't quite do yet, for example, then when the foundation labs release their next model, your startup gets swallowed. All the work you did to make it a little better sort of gets swallowed into the black hole. If you build at the right edge away from the black hole, then when the model comes out, a new model comes out that's smarter, you can just use that new model and your startup gets upgraded overnight.
We didn't talk about robots, but we made some investments in robotics. One of them is Symphony. They're making robots that pick strawberries. If you think about what's hard for robots, it turns out that picking up something like a strawberry without crushing it is extremely difficult. For human, it's trivial. We have millions of sensors. Every skin cell has some feedback, but the robot has these, this eye that's slow and this, 255 settings from here to here. And so Symphony is just able to do this just barely. And this is something that's going to get easier for them to have a robotic vision language action model that says pick up the strawberry without crushing it. That's going to make their whole business much easier.
Is that something that we expected to see more or do expect to see more in the upcoming batches? Like just being able to, the data sets and the models associated with the real world versus LLMs.
Robotics is a few years behind the pure software, and maybe the acceleration rate is a little slower, but essentially what you see in the pure software coding happens then in the rest of software, and that happens in some form of hardware. So you can kind of look ahead to what's been happening.
It seems to suffer from the constraint like training data, whereas like the LLMs had the benefit they could always do with more training data and eventually start generating synthetic stuff, but like more synthetic data is needed for the physical world. Like, I guess, it's still being collected right now, but it seems like it's a challenge to still work through just having sufficient training data sets, especially ones that are not completely proprietary.
Broadly, we're seeing a huge wave of robotics enabled by what's happening in AI.
Yeah, sure.
Unbelievable wave, because it used to require so much more hardware and so many more sensors to understand the position of the robot and the action it was taking. And now you can do a lot with these sort of new AI approaches, right?
Yeah.
They are still lacking in data. So a few approaches we've seen. One is startups that are built around collecting real world data, like physical data.
Yeah.
Humans doing tasks, or humans even using certain like gloves that mirror the robot hands doing tasks, and selling that data or using that data to train models. That's one. Another is teleoperation. If you can make a robot that someone can remotely control to do the task, then already that is potentially cheaper than having someone have to physically stand there and do it in a factory. And while doing that, you are collecting training data that is useful for that exact task. And then the third way is that these robotic models are getting more generalized. And so you can build training data in simulation. You can build these world models that sort of predict what's going to happen when you take certain actions. And these are much more generalized approaches.
One of the other mental models we use is the strangler fig.
So the strangler fig is a plant that grows up a tree, and essentially doesn't have its own branches or structure. It just grows around. It just uses the structure of the tree, and they can coexist like that for many, 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 many years. Eventually, the strangler fig plant fully engulfs the tree, and the tree dies from the inside, and all that's left is the strangler fig in the shape of the tree. The strangler fig mental model is all we need to do is talk to your legacy database. And we're going to automate some things for you that make your life a lot easier using AI. We're going to see the data going in. We're going to, see the emails coming in that have purchase orders and pull out the specifics of the purchase orders and enter that into your ERP for you. When you have all the input and all the output, then you don't need the ERP anymore. You can sort of replace it. That's the strength, and that's the tree dying inside, right? So this is a playbook that we're seeing in our portfolio that's been successful for tackling these like outdated industries that want a new solution, but they can't because they're so locked in.
So one of the things, we're chatting about like great customer adoption. People are spending money on these businesses. A question I often hear, and I think chatting with some of our investors in the fund, and certainly some of the context you'll hear in the, I guess, different blogs and newspapers, is just like how resilient that revenue is. And so like kind of as we think of things like revenue seems to be growing quickly, the result is like we are seeing valuations go up. Interesting enough, though, like there's almost like multiple compression because like valuations have gone up, but the revenues have really gone up compared to what we've seen as previous years. I think there's still sort of the question on like how resilient some of that revenue is. There's Gartner had a study that like 40% of agents will be ripped out next year. CFOs and CTOs on their budget and how they're thinking about token spend and value. And so quite a load of questions, a lot to unpack there. I guess there's like the combination of like the business models and how it's being priced, revenue and how it's growing and how resilient it is, and then how that's potentially or is affecting valuations.
These are the wrong metrics. They're the wrong questions. They're kind of, I don't know what to call it, fear-mongering, or they don't understand. The problem isn't spending tokens. That's like hiring somebody. And you see there are hiring sprees and firing sprees, but that's not the point. The point is, were you productive? Did you get tasks done? And that is very clear to see with AI. You can find this on a free open source model or ChatGPT, even a free subscription. You can play with it. You can see how powerful it is, but you can't work it into your systems. You can't make it repeatable, reliable. That's what people are paying for.
It's moving so quickly on what's changing with AI is like kind of the anchoring points on expectations of what people think AI can do. And so if your first interaction was with, the first model of GPT and you plugged it in, you're like, feels like a toy. It doesn't really do anything. And you anchor on that experience. And I think a lot of executives or people who are, maybe more senior in some of the organizations have kind of anchored on different points and are having trouble translating like that formative first experience with AI and translating into that, like how it will have value for the business.
So there's two pricing models that are popping up. One is pay per use, you could say, or pay per token in a way. So Claude Code's a little bit like that, where, the more you use it, the more you spend. The other, and I think the most common thing we're seeing is just enterprise contract pricing that tries to price per the value that's being created.
There's another model we're seeing in robotics as a service, where you charge hourly for this robot to do the labor. That's also a little easier for the customers to get their heads around. That's difficult for the startup because there's still a huge capital expense to create the robot and whatnot, but just as in terms of an experiment with getting adoption, it kind of helps because it fits into the existing models.
Maybe circle back to agents as sort of future employee. Like as agents start to act more unsupervised, there's new business models that are opening up or new challenges or risks that are taking place. And so like trust, liability, authorization are some of the stuff that, companies solving in that space. We chatted about Claimy. I guess there's Mount, Clawvisor. Like how should one think about right now, trust and liability and authorization for agents? And then the second part of that question is like a year from now, where potentially are the new businesses in agents? So kind of put in prediction seed in there, but like what's the next problem that's going to need to be tackled for agents?
I suppose it's something like, there are these Wall Street traders that can have large budgets, and if they're doing certain kind of derivatives, they can have some crazy leverage, like 1,000 to 1 or something. And so, normally they're doing well, and every once in a while you hear a story, somebody made a bad trade and it blew up the bank. And so that's not a good risk for people. So that I think that kind of tail risk, just ridiculous, what to call it, it's impact to your ability to survive. Survival is what these insurance companies are doing. Claimy and Mount are trying to put some kind of policy on this, that an agent might just run completely out of the bounds of what you thought it might do and do something like that that might destroy the company. It's like an existential risk. And so they're trying to cover this kind of thing.
There's all kinds of new bottlenecks that will happen. And there's all kinds of new sort of meta problems we need to solve about how agents and humans interact and how we do this in a safe way that, where people like what's happening. And, how do you let agents buy stuff? Do you just say, here's a credit card, there's no limit? Or do you say, here's a $50 budget? Or do you have something like more nuanced that lets the agent kind of like interact with the system in a repeatable way? And this is sort of like the sort of areas like someone like Clawvisor is playing with, is like, how do we give just the right permissions that the agent actually needs rather than just blanket access to everything? And you'll see more and more, and then how do you make sure that the agent can't sort of like go haywire and go do stuff that wasn't intended, or that someone can't prompt it to do that intentionally? So you have all these different security questions and prompt engineering questions and supervision questions and human agent interaction questions and agent interaction questions that are all going to be very, very important.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's like bringing on a new employee. It's like, okay, if they need a phone number, okay, they need email, okay, we need to make sure there's some insurance for them so they don't do things wrong. Oh, how do we give them payment? How do we make sure that like there's permissioning so they aren't accessing data that they shouldn't access or acting upon that? How do we scope their job? It's pretty fascinating. And then as each of these get tackled, it opens up a new branch of the tree on what things we need to solve.